Good afternoon, everyone. So I hope I don't know whether this will be very interesting or not, but it's always a challenge. Hima is smiling. It's always a challenge to keep the audience engaged after the lunch, particularly, right? I hope I'll be just give you some food for thought again. Lineup of programs which are there, and it was very interesting. And we are just talking. It's a good mix of both research and application areas, and you were just getting a lot of input about a lot of things which are going on in the NLP world. So that's a great news. I'm just going to give you my perspective of what are some of the things that we are focused on in a company like mine, right? I work for Fidelity Investments. As you know, it's an investment company, right? One of the type of companies inside the financial services. It's a diversified sector, but just one of the types of companies within the financial services. And I'm just going to give you my take on how the NLP work happens in a company like ours, or maybe in a generic context to the financial services, and how things work out or don't work out, right? That's very important to keep in mind as you go back, develop your own stuff in NLP and sort of try to implement that, right? Okay, so just setting the context, right? Financial services typically is a very, very highly regulated sector. Unlike some of the other, like for example, for tech companies or even for compared to industrial companies, financial services is a highly regulated sector. Meaning there are a lot of regulations, there are a lot of laws, there are a lot of rules on what you can do, what you can't do. And particularly, the data is very, very sensitive. Even if it is, even if, there are a lot of structured data, of course, customers, their accounts, their balances, their investment portfolio, et cetera. There's a lot of those structured data. But also there are a lot of unstructured data on which the NLP kind of work happens, right? For example, their call transcripts. Whenever they're placing a call to the company, those calls are getting recorded, right? And they get transcribed, and it becomes a very rich source of information for the company, right? But that's very sensitive data, right? So there's a lot of data sensitivity, and it's a highly regulated sector, which means there's a lot of work also you can do for interpreting those regulations, right? NLP can actually play a very, very important role in interpreting those regulations, laws, different clauses of different regulations. And also, as I said, can work in, tremendously sometimes with that sensitive text data that we have, right? It's also very diversified and non-standard, right? As I said, financial services is a huge spectrum. You have banking companies, you have insurance companies, you have investment banks. There are non-banking financial companies, microfinance companies, and fintech companies, right? There are a lot of diversity in terms of the products and services that are offered by different companies. And hence, it becomes difficult to sort of come up with uniform and standards in any kind of applications or technologies or any kind of even data, metadata, data definition. Everything becomes very challenging. I was actually looking at the standards work that probably IEEE is doing, which will actually be very good, if we can, come up with something. But in my experience, what I've seen is it's very challenging. You define, a kind of metadata or even your tags or labels for different kinds of data. It works in a particular setting, but doesn't work in the other setting, right? There are so much of differences in terms of defining, your new products and services. It's very difficult. So it's a very, very diversified and non-standard environment. Also, if you look at, the challenge, but also, it's also an opportunity, right? This is somewhere the NLP can actually work wonders, right? If, for example, just imagine a situation where you have to map, customer information from one kind of product to another kind of product, right? There, what we have seen is the structured data is very difficult because you have to go through a lot of, data definitions and so on and so forth. NLP helps in extracting the context in which people talk, right? Or people sort of correspond with the company. And hence, there can be a very good opportunity to map between different kind of, data sources. The third one, which is the customer-facing processes, and it's a fertile ground for any kind of NLP work. As I mentioned, right, more than any other sector probably, I don't know, apart from telecom sector probably, the amount of customer data that we sort of deal with, as I said, not only structured, but also unstructured, right? Their calls, their emails, chat, variety of data, right? So this is actually a very fertile ground for NLP kind of work. But the NLP work that happens in typical companies like financial services, and maybe it's true for any projects that happen in financial services, is very, very sensitive to the return on investment, right? And so if a project is started or any kind of research work and application work is started, if it doesn't yield quick returns in a reasonable time, it will die, right? I've seen in my own career itself, there are a lot of enthusiastic work that starts to happen because of all the richness that the data provides in the NLP space. But we just develop the POCs. We just don't go beyond that, right? So you must always keep in mind that any kind of project is very sensitive to return on investments, but it's probably, in my experience, getting a return on investment sort of KPI or calculation is probably easier on structured data, but it's a little more difficult in NLP kind of a situation or textual data. And there are scale-out issues, right? And I'll give you some examples about it. But what happens is many times, we just go on doing POCs and we demonstrate an idea, right? But what people really are interested in is how will it fit into my architecture, right? I have a current architecture, and particularly in financial services, there are a lot of analytics, there are a lot of models, there are a lot of assets, analytical assets, which are in production already. For example, credit scoring, right? It's happening on structured data most of the time. For example, what's your next best product that you can offer to people, right? A lot of models which are already running in your production system. Now you bring in a NLP model, right? The IT people who are implementing them are going to ask questions. How is this going to, mesh with the existing models? Or if the business people are going to ask, how am I going to leverage them, right? So we'll be better off to keep these two issues in mind when we are talking about the NLP kind of work in the financial services. So one solution to this is in my experience, what I have found is if NLP work or NLP projects can be made a part of the bigger solution right from the word start, right? That becomes a much better proposition for people to sort of accept or kind of get ready for its deployment and so on and so forth. Right? I'm going to give you an example here. So this is a part of the digital transformation of a little older company. Maybe you can say Fidelity Investments has been there for like 70 years, and a lot of its processes are not like born digital companies, right? There are a lot of manual interactions, interfaces. People go to branches, talk to representatives. They call most of the time, to fix different kinds of issues in their investment portfolio or different kinds of things. But that's not exactly the way the born digital companies would work, right? So we have a desire also to transform ourselves from a sort of, it's not exactly, I wouldn't call it brick and mortar, but yes, in that kind of a world to more digitally savvy world, right? And that will require a lot of data, models, and kind of automated sort of implementation of those models, right? So for example, yeah. So if we, let's say, if we want to digitize most of those customer interactions, right? What kind of data sources do we look at? We look at our web data, we look at chats, we look at their calls, etc. And then we need to create different kinds of, intents, right? What people are calling us with, or what people really want, right? What are their needs, right? And then we need to create models which will be able to score really real time. Because when people are coming and interfacing with representatives in the bank or so on and so forth, they're actually there for them, right? It's live in present. You are getting assistance from the person. Now, if somebody is, let's say, coming onto our digital channel and looking for certain information and things like that, we should be able to score that person in our model, right? And then we should be able to do proactive recommendation, which will kind of serve their purpose, or even if you can identify their service intent, etc., that can also serve their purpose, right? So, a lot of questions are asked. What is the, digital, for example, service needs people have, right? What gaps exist in their servicing right now? How many customers experience gaps online, for example? So my point is, when the digital service transformation project was conceived, right? It was not conceived as a NLP project. It was conceived as a business problem that we are trying to solve, right? And then within that, there can be a lot of structured data. For example, product recommendations only doesn't come from customers' interactions, but also their transactions, their previous history, their demographics, account information that we have, right? So here, it has to all get combined, right? And the overall output is something that is going to improve this particular, use case that we are looking at as to how to improve the online service needs, or how to satisfy customers' service needs online rather than them having to come to branches or calling us and so on and so forth, right? Sorry. And what kind of data did we use in this? And I just want to point out one critical thing is that you have to use a variety of techniques for a variety of data that you will encounter. So for this kind of a problem, right, we will use our web page information, the entire information which is present in our web pages, what's happening in the call transcripts, why are people calling us, what issues are they facing, right? Process notes and process logs, clickstream data, the entire, what we call the digital exhaust, right? People just come browse different pages and all the clickstream information that we have. Emails and chats, right? Now you can appreciate that all these different kinds of data, right, require different kinds of NLP treatment, right? For example, the clickstream typically comes in a very, short URL with a session information, right? A session covering, let's say, 10 different URLs or 50 different URLs, right? How do you sort of aggregate all that information into creating the context as to what people, what website or what section of our web assets or website are people looking at, and hence what will be his or her interest, right? The call transcripts, interestingly, come with the entire conversation that people have with our representatives. They're asking questions, the representatives are answering those questions, and then the entire context builds in there, right? How do you disambiguate which answer is for which question? Customer may ask 3 questions, representative may answer the last question first, the first question second, and the middle question third. Do you realize the challenge? How do you sort of disambiguate which answer is for which question, right? Then we have, process logs. Process logs are kind of semi-structured. They have a lot of, structured information, but also have error logs and, different kinds of things, right, that you need to pre-process. So my point is, when you're looking at an NLP application, and typically this is my view, is that you are better off by looking at it holistically, right, part of the whole problem, and thinking about what challenges you're going to face in using all this variety of data to solve this problem. So typically what I see here, these are some of the few things that we are actually working at right now. This may not cover the entire spectrum. So what I'm going to talk about is this spectrum of research, application, and engineering a little bit, right? What are the areas that we are focused on in research? What applications we are working on, and how we are sort of thinking about in scaling it out into our engineering. Question answering, right? Question answering, I would say, is one of the primary research areas for us. It's more evolved than just information retrieval. Information retrieval is when you just put a query, right, or just type out a question, and you just produce some information, right? As I just mentioned, in our case, question answering has a lot of nuances, right? For example, there are a lot of things like question-question mapping, right? For example, if I ask you a question, what is the minimum investment in this product? And I ask you another question, is there an investment limit in this product, right? Or similar such questions. Now you can see that all these questions probably are very similar, and they probably have just one good answer, right? How do you map each question, or create that cluster of questions, or create that entire there are different approaches in which you can solve it, but how do you create that mapping? Extracting the right answer, right? There can be different kinds of answers to a question. How do you say which one is the right answer? Now, you require a lot of labeling of those data, that this is the right answer or not. And for us, it is really difficult for getting the domain experts to actually tag the data that this is the right answer, right? So we actually use a lot of transfer learning for solving that issue. What we have seen is, what we really would like to have is the context of our data, that is different kinds of intents or contexts that people talk about. And what we have seen is, if we apply it to a variety of our data sets, we actually get similar results. They may not be all the same, but there are similar results. So we can actually start with transfer learning and create some labels for our data, and then later on ask for some domain expert views and for more labeling assistance from them, right? Topic extraction is another area where it's not just topics, but also issues, right? Topics are different than issues, because for issues, you need to pinpointly say what exactly the customers are talking about. It's just not a broad topic. It can be a very, very specific thing, right? So how do you sort of disambiguate between one issue and the other? For example, it's a very simple thing, like password reset, right? Most of our non-value add calls that come to our customer center is about password reset. People just simply forget their password. People, just misplace their password. They don't remember, right? Or there can be a system refresh, or there can be a regulatory refresh. So as you can see, for the password to get reset, for a customer's password, if it has been reset, there are all these different conditions in which the password reset can happen, right? How do you disambiguate between those issues? What is the real issue? So broad topic can be a password reset, but what exactly goes behind, or what is the real click down on that issue, is really important for us. Taxonomy generation is another area where it's very difficult to actually generate. As I said, it's very diversified. We have tried various methods in generating taxonomies and stuff like that. We are not there yet. The effort is still on, and hopefully we should make some progress there. So these are some of the things that we are working on the research side. On the application side, one of the primary areas is virtual assistants. Typically, it's a much abused term in the industry today to call it chatbots, right? Chatbot is not a virtual assistant. We actually, do a lot of stuff with the virtual assistants. In fact, we are trying to, automate some of our regular, tasks that customers want to do with virtual assistants, right? I'll show you some of that. Sentiment mining and customer experience, that's very important. You can say that, well, every time we do certain things, what are the customers saying about it, what are they feeling, and things like that. Digital service transformation, I showed you how do we sort of make a brick and mortar company into more digital company, and how do we sort of keep discovering what are the friction points, how do we remove those friction points, how do we make our processes more streamlined, more digital, etc. Corporate governance is another area where NLP is used heavily, right? This is something very similar to fraud detection, right? We don't do that much of work on fraud detection as such. That really happens, but not here in my team. What we touch on is corporate governance, right? I'll give you an example there quickly. People analytics, a lot of NLP applications are now used in people analytics, from recruitment to retention to engagement, etc. Social media analytics, this is more of a, I would say, it was a big hype some time back. It probably didn't live up to its reputation, I would say, or that hype. We did use some of it, didn't get much, mileage out of it, but still remains as part of our portfolio sometimes. So these are some of the applications that we work with. And when it goes to engineering, right, these are some of the things that has to be kept in mind, right? What is our data lake architecture, right? Typically, all financial services actually built their data infrastructure for quite some time. And all this was geared towards more of structured data, right? So we had, for example, a big Oracle Exadata infrastructure with, analytical warehouse defined and stuff, a lot of things like that. But that really won't work for text data. So in came our Hadoop infrastructure with HDFS, and we started storing, all our text data in flat files and Hive stores and stuff like that. And now we are sort of going into the cloud, right? So all that, has to be kept in mind when you're developing that application and when that has to go to engineering for production. Ingesting pipeline. How do you ingest that data? How that data comes to you, right? Does it come in JSON formats? Does it come in flat files? Does it come in, some other method? Very important. Your entire pre-processing pipeline will depend on that, right? So that's also critical. The pre-processing, as I said, depends on variety of sources of data. I would say we use all those techniques, right? Stemming, lemmatization, pause tagging, a variety of things to basically, do pre-processing and extract features for our models and stuff like that. But it's not a very standard thing, I would say, still, right? There's a lot of work that requires, and it's kind of a craft to basically, get these various components, aligned in a pipeline. Then model scoring, you need to ensure that your models are getting scored every day for you to be able to, generate any kind of insight or model scores or alerts or this thing. Otherwise, if you don't do this, then all your NLP that you did remains in POC stage. If you're not able to generate a score to be able to send an alert, maybe through an API orchestration, then it still remains as a POC, right? You should be able to think about, the algorithm piece is definitely very different than the structured world, but as far as implementation is concerned, if you are not able to score your model and give out your output through an API framework, then I don't think anybody is going to use it, right? And then you have to think about the model governance piece also. Like your natural, your structured data models, the models from the NLP models also, decay, right? Because at least what I have seen is the input data is improving, right? For example, 2 years back or 3 years back, the speech-to-text conversion technology that was used in creating a lot of our call transcripts has really improved, right? In the 3 years. And what I see is the models that were built back then, needs to be rebuilt again, or at least to be retrained again, right? So a governance framework, if you define that, I think that will keep you in good health for future, right? So just to give you some thought as to, what, according to me, what we are doing in this space, and probably, some of the things that you should keep in mind. Right, so I'll give you some specific examples here. So for example, this service transformation, right? The primary question that was asked is how customers use our various channels, right, in their service fulfillment, how do they transition, and ultimately, are they successful, right? A very broad question. How do you sort of think about creating this entire, branching out this question into sub-questions or sort of problems that you can solve for each data source or each channel, right? So, sorry. Right. So this is a visualization of what we came up with, after the entire data munging and data, crunching activity. So these are some of our channels, right? Sorry. These are some of our channels. ICS is, just imagine that's a system. Weblogs are our, web page visits. Search, we took search as a separate channel because, people go from search, they go to various things. Calls, right, and branch visits. Now, if you take all the sessions that happens from this sunburst chart, you could see how many people are transitioning from one channel to the other and then to another channel, right? Or sometimes it can go up to, 5 or 6 different layers. The business didn't have this insight earlier, right? Because each channel was thinking that, okay, I'm serving my customers the best, right? Our call center saying that, we serve our customers the best possible way. Digital channel says that, okay, we are keeping all the information ready for people to access. The ICS channel says, okay, everything is set in my world, and I try to process customers' applications or, service queries as soon as possible. But then, if that is true, then this kind of thing should not happen, right? People, come to one channel, their needs don't get satisfied, they go to another channel. That doesn't happen, they go to another channel, right? So just imagine to construct this, right? We had to, as I said, we took a lot of data from our web channels, from calls, from the ICS channel and branch visits, and then various techniques were used to extract and synthesize the customer journey. You have to bring all this into a normalized sort of structure in order to be able to build this kind of a picture. And this was very effective. The moment people saw this, they realized that there has to be more alignment between channels, right? And then the entire there's an effort called digitization of service that got kicked off because of this. And that's the power of the NLP applications, showing some real insight to people. And out of this now, we actually run different models to score what people are doing on different channels, right? Virtual assistants, as I said, so some, the normal chatbot kind of thing that is, answering questions, answering customers' questions, that probably has become a little bit of cliche right now, right? People use various techniques to kind of do that. But what is really important is, in our kind of scenario, it's just not, just not give you, people won't like if you just give that kind of a answer, right? How do you create more conversational context? conversational is like when two human beings talk, right? Hey, how are you today? What's the weather like, right? All these are, conversations that people have. So how do you sort of create conversational context for customers? As I said, semantic similarity between questions. That's a very, very important thing, because even today I was trying my bank's, I don't want to take the name, my bank's chatbot. I said, are you guys open today? Is the bank open today? It prompted back to me saying that, are you asking the question, is the bank open on Sundays? I said, this is like, today's Saturday, for example. If the bot would have picked up at least some context, it should have asked me the question, are you asking, is it open on Saturdays? But it's asking, are you asking the question, is it open on Sundays? Then I translated, I put the same question back, saying that, is the bank open on Saturdays? Then it gave me the answer, the bank is not open on Sundays. Right? So it's very important to understand, and in our kind of scenario where we are dealing with people's life savings, people don't get amused by this kind of answers, right? So we need to be very, very careful in doing this. Context disambiguation and dependency, context dependency. If you're working with a bot, you tell the bot something, it should remember the context, right? Because later on, if you're talking about it, then that context should also come into picture, right? How do you do that, right? And answer mining. So this is just an experimental stuff that we are doing. Here is the bot, which is going on, interacting. But at the same time, we are measuring, our models are measuring, what is the customer experience, right? What is the business opportunity, and what is the sentiment, overall sentiment going? So we actually build models which will rank various questions and answers and how the bot is doing, and we actually give the score to the bot, right? So that is one thing that we are actually doing to sort of improve our models and in this area. Enterprise search. As we all know, right, search has evolved quite a bit. Today, if you if you type a search phrase in Google, Google will give you direct answers, Google will give you related questions, and then it will show you the links, right? But doing that in a domain-specific world is very challenging, because Google is working on a lot of documents. It has a lot of, millions and billions of search phrases. We have very few. But what we are trying to build is very similar, direct answers. So if the customer is typing transfer, we are showing the direct answers, some recent transfers that he has done, right? Related questions. Is the customer asking about this question, right? And then some recommendations and quick links. And then, of course, comes the search results, right? So this is some of the, I'm just showing you some of the useful examples that we are working with. So in all of this, what is really important is mapping the intent, right? As we said, as we have seen different applications like service transformation or virtual assistants or the search, everywhere the intent is important. Capturing customers' intent is really important. And we are actually building different kinds of models, and we're testing out what's the accuracy, what's the recall, etc. for those models, and how we can improve those models from going forward. So this is a very active research area for us. As I promised, I'm just giving you a context of how we are using NLP for corporate governance. For example, I'll give you a scenario, China, right? China is the second largest growth engine in the world. And any investment manager, any portfolio manager cannot ignore China. But do you really trust the information which is available for public Chinese companies? right? Not that trustworthy, right? Can we build applications, right, which will build the knowledge base and the knowledge graph so that we are able to know each entity, that is the companies and the directors, what transactions happen, etc., and kind of keep a track of this thing. We have used this in practice and we have saved quite a bit of, fraud. We have detected quite a bit of fraud activity right in time and, have saved a lot of customers' money. People analytics, just to tell you that, a lot of applications in hiring, engagement, learning and development, and attrition or retention is happening. As I said, data privacy and security is very challenging there, and integrating those insights and processes with our normal data is of course challenging. I'm not going to delve into that into much detail. Now, engineering. So this is what your structured architecture looks like, right? You have your data store and all the flows happen, all the features get calculated, and then your models happen. And this is how your typical text or NLP models look like. How do you marry these two, right? That's something that you should keep in mind, right? Not easy, but if you really persevere and think about it, it can be done, and we have been successful in doing that. Just wanted to leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Take a couple of questions.
So, Debashish, I was just wondering, right, in terms of model governance, right? What kind of governance, what kind of issues do you face around model governance, and maybe if you could throw some light on what kind of practices are used to ensure that, one, models in production, don't drift away. Second, how do you even decide, right? A data scientist who builds a model thinks that my model is the coolest, right?
Yes.
But the person who signs up on it, right? How does that person decide which model to actually, forward and put it into production?
Sure. So this is also an evolving field, right? So what we have seen in kind of in our model governance is have checkpoints for data, features, and then model output. At all those three stages, right? Is your data shifting, right? So for example, in NLP context, in structured data is very easy to see if the distribution is shifting and all that. In NLP kind of thing, you can say, is your word error rate changing, right? As I said, 3 years back, the transcription errors were different than it is now, right? Then second stage is features. Are your features, really giving you, that kind of, is it really capturing that kind of information that you had thought of? And of course, the model output. So at those three levels, we try to, implement a few of models of our own, right? Or measures, so that will give us an idea whether the model is still good or not. Yeah.
Last question.
Thank you for the nice talk. So my question is on the inclusion of NLP right in the initiation stage. You said when you're starting off a project, think of NLP things.
Yeah.
Most of the times, these are visionary ideas, meaning it is not solving the core use case, but it would be something that it's not a must-have, but it is something that
nice
to have kind of a thing. So how do you kind of justify as senior management or somebody who's approving your resource allocation budgets and all that in such kind of scenarios where how do you showcase the return on investment? Because you don't have any key numbers to say, this is the manual process and this is how the automation would kind of leverage and bring up that cost benefit analysis. So what is your suggestion on what are ways that we can do to?
Yeah, in fact, that is why I said, if you are able to weave your, NLP project idea into a bigger picture, right, where there will be, let's say, models which are coming from structured data, right? How do you sort of work with if it is in your team that you can work with, well and good, or if you can collaborate with another team which is developing those models, right? Where can your input actually serve them better, right? So we developed, the way we did it, I can relate an example, is we are developing intent models earlier only from structured data, right? So what we did was, when we pitched this, extracting intent from unstructured data on a standalone basis, people ask the same question, right? What is going to be the benefit? So what we did, in fact, okay, so we'll create features. We'll create features first from the unstructured data and flow that back into our structured models, right? So that it gets a lift from where it was to what it can do, right? And then basically leverage that to say that, okay, independently we can do a lot more, right? So that's how, that's one way of going about it.
Thanks a lot, Debashis, for your time.
Thank you.
Request to Dashri to give you a small memento of our thanks.
Thank you.